Okay, I'm going to make a start. They've closed the doors now, so you can't escape. Hello, my name is Matt, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work we have done and continue to do with user profiles in Plone Intranet. I'm hoping it will be interesting from a few perspectives in terms of the challenges that we faced and some of the packages that we used from Plone and some of the things that we contributed back to Plone. I'm also going to try and give a live demonstration of integration with Active Directory. Really, what could go wrong there? As I said, my name is Matt. This is my third child, Sophie, who was born about 2 months ago. With any of my other children, if you'd ask me how old they were, I'd be able to tell you down to like the hour. But with the third child, it's like, she's alive, she's beautiful, and I can't tell you much more. That was a slight digression. So, user profiles. I may end up in this talk contradicting a few of the things that Guido said in his talk this morning, only because when we set out to build user profiles are the thing in our experience that you are most likely to customize or need to do work on when you deploy an intranet, because every organization wants to store different information about users, and so in producing user profile, we tried to produce something that worked out of the box but was also customizable to an extent that a lot of the rest of Plone Intranet is not. But we'll get onto that. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of user stories, which are often used to plan out requirements from quite a high level, what the user wants to achieve. They usually go something along the lines of, as a certain type of user, I want to perform a certain action so that I can fulfill my dreams and live a productive life. My summary of most user stories, in my experience, can be just summed up as a human being, I want to be able to do my job quickly so that I can go to the pub. They could all kind of be boiled down to that. There were a lot of real user stories that went into producing the prototype for user profiles, which you've probably seen a few times. So many. Guido worked with many user stories, worked with our designer Cornelius to produce something that is quite rich and accomplishes quite a lot, focused around a user and their interactions. But we actually approached, when then taking this, we approached an idea that we called developer stories. And we actually wrote kind of user stories from a developer perspective, in terms of what developers might want, what integrators and developers might want to do when they were deploying a Plone Intranet in terms of users. So my general rule for developer stories is they all boil down to this. As an integrator, I want to be able to customize my deployment without monkey patching code so that I can sleep at night. Which can be further boiled down to change all the things. So some particular, we wrote quite long actual user stories, but they're too long to fill on a slide. So they kind of came down to the kind of things that you want to do in like a deployment of Plone Intranet, which will be, you might want to hide certain fields because they're not appropriate to your deployment. You might want to reorder fields. You might want to add new fields. You might want to change the validators for your fields. You might want to mark some of them as read-only because there's some coming from somewhere else. You might want to change the permissions. And you might want to load some from somewhere else. So we can't pretend that users don't already have some kind of LDAP directory or Active Directory where there's already this kind of information, and we need to be able to make use of those things. And again, all of these these stories can be probably summarized in let's change all the things. So the Plone Intranet rules, as Guido laid out this morning, they're not really rules, but I couldn't come up with a better title. So the vision of Plone Intranet is to have an out-of-the-box solution that works well in most cases and doesn't require you to have things like LDAP to run. It's built from as you've heard many times, a design-led UI and UX, and we don't have auto-generated forms like with Z3C form. So that proves a bit of a challenge with how do we make something as rich as this and yet make it customizable without me having to fork the entire thing just because I don't want to do biography, because that's not appropriate to what I'm doing. So they're more like guidelines anyway. Cornelius will shoot me if he ever sees this slide. So the way you do it is you have some Z3C form, if you know what you're doing, which I didn't, but now kind of do. So this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, this slide. So the solution that we came up with is the default deployment uses dexterity membrane to represent the users, and then we have custom Z3C forms which are built from the interfaces defined by dexterity membrane and take those fields and render them in a format that fits the styles. So that's how it works out of the box. The customization on top of that we built is with Plone registry. So there are a lot of registry hooks that you can use to tweak things and hide things. You can then extend, because we use dexterity membrane, you can then just add behaviors to your user type if you want to make, change your validators or make them work in a slightly different way. And then there's also built-in integration options which use PAS, which is the central kind of authentication and user management system. And I'll go into each of these as we go on. And the summary is that at any of these points, you don't need to do any monkey patching, so you can sleep better, hopefully. So just talking about the deployment step, who is familiar with membrane here? Some people. So we use dexterity membrane. There are kind of two reasons for this. One is I like the users as content paradigm. I think once you get to a certain site, a certain stage of site where your users have a certain level of complexity, then the default kind of member data stuff just doesn't really cut it. I also like users as content because it gives a consistency for users. So user profiles are edited with the same UI as the whole of the rest of Plone. And also a consistency as a developer. It means you can take advantage of things like behaviors to make extensions to your users. And it also helps us with the search integration. So we have serverless search integration, which automatically makes all of our content searchable. And having the users as real content in the system means we don't have to do any more work to let you have a directory of users that you can search. Yep. I've lost my notes. How do you do notes in Keynote? This is amazing. Oh, here we are. Present to notes. Yes, I found them. It's fine. So I'm now going to try and do a demo. This is exciting. A brief demo. Oh, no, that's gone too far. So here we are. Here's what it looks like. This is a real piece of content. This is my profile on this demo instance. You can see it looks similar to the prototype, hopefully. you can log in with this, so it provides authentication. That's the main thing that Dexterity Membrane gives us, is having an item of content that you can also authenticate as. And this is all completely custom HTML. And then what it does is actually using a pattern, it pulls in a custom Z3C form to this part of the page to allow editing and rendering of your user data. So it's got some user data in there. Just check my, yep. So I can change these and I can save these, and it does validation. It does all the kind of things that you want from a Z3C form, not to do manually, and that's what that looks like. So if you want to change any of that, we built quite a few registry hooks that you can use to, the main ones, just to customize them, there are hidden fields and read-only fields. Now normally you might, to do these in the standard deployment, you would change the behavior. But because we have an out-of-the-box deployment, the point of this is that this lets you hide and make things read-only without having to fork the user type or do crazy things like that. So I can go into the registry here. So this is the this is just looking at bus and letter, and you can see that I have hidden fields here, and there's one down here called read-only fields. So if I, for instance, decide that there's like a salutation, a person title on here, I can save that one, go back to here, you can see it's just there, and if I just hit reload, then it's gone. So that's simple. And a similar thing for the read-only fields, it will show them as read-only. So we talked about Customise, just kind of making more tweaks, small tweaks. Extending, you can use behaviors. So if you don't know what behaviors are, then that's beyond the remit of this talk, but they make customizing dexterity types very simple. So you can just add new fields. So an example of that is, if I go into we provide a default behavior. There are some core fields here which are basically required, and it wouldn't really work without them. But then there are these additional profile fields. So this is just me going into, you do this with something like generic setup if you were doing a sane deployment, but I can basically say additional profile fields, no, I don't want that behavior. And obviously you can make your own behavior and add it in, or and what that does is, this is kind of basic dexterity. So suddenly I've just cut down my fields quite a bit. I'm just going to put them back in because I need them later. Then the final stage is to integrate. So if you want your data to come from somewhere else, then you might want it to come, because your users come from LDAP. But out of the box, you can get that to work by just installing plone.ldap on your site. But you then need a pretty decent connection to LDAP at all times. And if we just had the properties coming from there, then you'd need LDAP all the time. But the point is that we have this data in Plone by default. So we've written some utility methods that you can run scripts to regularly synchronize with these kind of PaaS plugins. So you can get authentication provided by LDAP, but then you can also, for every single one of the properties, you can say this comes from LDAP or this doesn't come from LDAP. And you can use that with a variety. It just uses the standard PaaS plugin. So although we've mainly done it with LDAP at the moment, any PaaS plugin that provided these things would work like that. So the two main entry points to this are, if you have a PaaS plugin that implements user enumeration, then you can set that as the primary external user source using this. My blue has gone wrong there. That's the registry entry. And then we basically provide this method called sync users, and that will look at your external user source and say, oh, there are people in here that I don't know about, so I'm going to create some profiles for them. Or it will say, oh, there are people who have disappeared from LDAP, so I know I need to disable them in Plone Intranet. And that just works out of the box. I'll try and do a quick demo of that in a moment. And then there's also properties. So if you have something that provides properties, which LDAP does as well, you can set up a property sheet mapping where every single one of the fields in the user profile you can actually map to a separate plugin. So you could have your name coming from LDAP. You could have, for example, you can have your email address coming from Twitter. If you've got a PaaS plugin that provides this, then you can link it. And again, there's a regular thing that you can call with cron, which synchronizes those. So this is now the exciting demo time. Where is... So, this is an exciting tool that I recently discovered called Apache Directory Studio. This is just a local LDAP server I have running. So what I'm going to do is attempt to let's log in as a different user. So, this, go away. This is Luke, and he has some fields, and he's represented in LDAP, so this is an LDAP tree. If you're not familiar with LDAP, it's horribly complicated, but this GUI makes it much nicer. So here is properties, and these are all mapped. So this upgrade Luke Skywalker. So he's got Jedi Knight Extreme there. And then I can basically call this sync user properties thing here. Refresh this page. There we go. So that's just been cached in Plone and is stored there. Another helpful feature. So I'm actually going to create a new entry. This is really long-winded, but so in this it's quite helpful. You can take a copy of someone and ignore all of this. So we're going to create this guy called Darth. Let's just delete some of the values. Yeah. Okay. Darth Skywalker. No, that's not his name at all. Well, I won't give too much away. Spoilers here. Spoilers. Now, at this point, so we've got Darth Vader there. At this point, he doesn't exist. I hope, anyway. Darth, there he is. So Darth doesn't exist because we haven't done any kind of sync yet. But because we are also using LDAP for authentication, because Darth is an AD, he's allowed to access the site. So as soon as I log in as Darth, if he doesn't have a profile, then one is created magically. Is that doing anything? Yeah, it's fine. Just sitting there for a while. So there. So I've logged in as Darth, and it's created me. It's created me a profile, and now I exist and can be found. So that happened automatically. And where I was talking about before with the defining your external user source, if I create someone else, let's do this again. The alternative is Okay. OB1. Don't think that's right. I don't know, what's Obi-Wan's official title? Anyone know? Jedi trainer. Let's go with that. Yeah, he's a master, isn't he? But then so's Luke, so I don't know how to differentiate them. Anyway, they can have the same job. Obi-Wan. Okay, so there's Obi-Wan. Now, obviously, it's not that useful. Obi-Wan's just joined the company, but he hasn't logged in yet. So that's not much use to anyone else. So as long as you defined LDAP as your central source, then you can just go sync users, and come on, yes, and he's there without being logged in, and it will synchronize those. There's also an extension which is documented, which will use particular features of LDAP to only update people who've been added in the last certain. It won't try and add everyone or only update people's properties. And the final feature that I implemented just for this demo is, let's do this. So Darth doesn't have a photo, and this is not live yet, but it just looked interesting, is that I can say, okay, is that actually doing that? No, I think that's wrong. I can do a new app preview. LDAP lets you store photos, so let's give Darth an image. Okay, so he's got a photo in LDAP, and I can hopefully run sync user properties again, and there we go. His photos come over from LDAP. So those are quite helpful. Let me just go back and so those are basically the options that we built in. No, where's it gone? Should have put this at the beginning. So we have a custom, an out-of-the-box solution using dexterity membrane Z2C form. You can tweak things slightly with Planet Registry. You can extend them with behaviors, and you can also integrate them with other systems with PAS. Just as a note to end on, we at NetSite have recently been through ISO 27001, which has caused us to evaluate a lot of our software security. So as part of this user profile work, we also recently updated Membrane so that its default hashing algorithm for passwords is now bcrypt. It was SHA, which is very old. Bcrypt is also quite old, but it's very slow and pretty secure if you want to read more about bcrypt. We also have a PR in access control to get that actually into ZOAP, or that may be more slow to go through, and that's backwards compatible with previous passwords as well. So pretty much everything I've talked about today is documented, and you can read here. If you go to the components part of the documentation and look at user profiles, then it's all documented, and obviously you can look at the code, and that's about it. Any questions?
So if I understand correctly, you synchronize, I'm talking about the LDAP properties you are synchronizing in the profile. You synchronize all the users same time when you launch this task. It might take time since there are a lot of users.
So the default, the one I was using there synchronizes all at the same time, but there's an additional LDAP one, which is also documented, which uses the modified property of LDAP to look for users who've changed since it was last run. So the sync users is a generic thing which works with any PAS plugin, and there isn't PAS support for querying, by a particular modified. So we then added some specific stuff that is linked to Plone App LDAP that will just synchronize users who've changed in the last whenever you ran, which for that very reason. Yeah.
Did you consider something like Plomino, which would have the added advantage that you would be able to let the integrator lay out the form? Like Z3 Form always sort of puts things in a linear sort of thing, and that would also allow them to have more customization over validation and you know, a bit more sort of control over the layout?
We didn't. I don't have a lot of experience with Plomino, but the idea was not to let the focus was not letting users lay out stuff. I think that would probably I imagine that would probably require some custom JavaScript, and it's all because all of our JavaScript is from patterns. That wasn't a focus, but that could potentially be done, I suppose, through Barcelona on that side. But the focus was on them just being presented in a consistent way, rather than kind of laying out that form.
I have two questions, and one is it now all in Plone Intranet, or can we use it in Plone 5 standalone?
I don't know. I think you would probably be able to use quite a bit of it in Plone 5. I think that quite a lot of the user profile, quite a lot of it is tied to the particular views. So we might have to do a bit more work separating out some of the utility methods. So a lot of the synchronization code is theoretically portable to other things, but at the moment there are also views in that package which render it in a certain way. But we might be able to move them out to different parts of Plone Intranet.
Okay.
So as it is, no, but in the future maybe.
And the second question is, since you worked with all the path stack, we all know that it's very splitted over several packages, and if you work with Membrane, you have several packages and so on. Do you plan, or would you like to merge the stuff all a bit together? Because I worked with it too and others, and it's always a hell to get through all the packages. Is there a kind of cleanup plan, or do you use your time primary to stack on top of it?
Most of it was done stacking on top of it. Obviously, we did a bit of work on Dexterity Membrane, which I know there were already plans to possibly put Dexterity Membrane back into Products Membrane, because at the moment Products Membrane is just archetypes where it doesn't really need to be, and have that package serve both worlds, and that would be good. The LDAP stack, I don't have the experience to think about simpler. That's a bigger job. That would be good and would be nice. And if there's some kind of if people have some time to invest in that, then it would be good.
It's a path stack, right? So we have all the path layers, like the path, Plone path, and so on.
Yeah. So we use Plone App LDAP, which is built on top of about 75 other packages, and it would be good to simplify that if possible. But at the moment, we
need to consider path plugins LDAP then.
Sorry?
You need to consider using path plugins LDAP then.
Okay. Yeah. I did have a little look at that one. I only became aware of it about halfway through. So, but I do want to look at that one.
Have you looked at SAML2 and ADFS integration? In particular, like one thing you lose when you get that is you don't necessarily get groups and stuff. You can get properties brought across, but you don't get the groups in Plone. Have you thought about how to synchronize that, and have you tried integrating it?
What were those two you mentioned?
So Active Directory Federated Services, which is an implementation of the SAML 2 standard.
We haven't looked at that. No, in one of the deployments we have with LDAP, we do have groups coming across from LDAP, and that's just provided by the PAS plugin. But I haven't looked at the federated services stuff.
I totally like the customization story for the forms. Just for the record, we created for one customer, I know it's totally insane, but we created something similar, a little lower level, where you not only override the fields if they're hidden or read-only, but also if they're hidden. This is not for user profiles, but for all content. If they're hidden or read-only in A, which state, workflow state, and B, which view, like the add view, the edit view, or I don't know, some third view. Mm-hmm. So it's a level of customizability that you actually don't want, but it's not that hard to implement. So if someone is interested in that code, I can give it away.
Right.
It's not beautiful.
Cool. Thank you for listening.